Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our presentation, Decode Your Workplace to Advance Your Career, presented by Mark Hirschberg, author of the Career Toolkit, Essential Skills for Success That No One Taught You. My name is Mara. I'm the content manager at Ivy Exec, and I'll be moderating today's session. Before we begin, I have a few brief housekeeping items for our audience. First, all attendees are currently in listen-only mode. However, we do encourage you to engage in the session by asking questions to our presenter, which you can do using the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll address them at the end. Additionally, we are recording today's session, so you can look forward to receiving a copy of the recording via email in the coming days. And now I would like to introduce you to today's presenter, Mark Hirschberg. Mark is the author of the Career Toolkit, Essential Skills for Success That No One Taught You. From tracking criminals and terrorists on the dark web to creating marketplaces and new authentication systems, Mark has spent his career launching and developing new ventures at startups and Fortune 500s and in academia. He helped to start the Undergraduate Practice Opportunities programs, dubbed MIT's Career Success Accelerator, where he teaches annually. At MIT, he received a BS in physics, a BS in electrical engineering and computer science, and a Master's of Engineering in electrical engineering and computer science, focusing on cryptography. At Harvard Business School, Mark helped create a platform used to teach finance at prominent business schools. He was formerly one of the top-ranked ballroom dancers and now works with many nonprofits, including Techie Youth and Plant a Million Corals. And with that, I will hand our presentation over to Mark. Mark, it's all yours.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. So let's jump right into the presentation. You got a little bit of my background from the bio. I've worked at companies from 3 to 300,000 people, from tiny startups to large corporations. I've worked in academia, in startups, in all sorts of companies. And one thing that I found across all these different companies, across all the thousands of people I've met and worked with and taught, is a number of them have struggled to get where they want to go in their career. And this was part of the motivation for why I helped create the class at MIT, for why I wrote the book, and why I do talks like this. Nothing bothers me more than seeing people who have potential in their career or even personal life who just can't seem to achieve it. So my goal with this talk is that we can help you become more effective in your workplace. And specifically, we're going to look at ways that you can be more effective by doing what I refer to as the unseen role. These are activities that apply to every job, things you've probably heard you should do, but no one's actually ever sat down and said, here are the ways to do it. And many of us had to struggle and kind of figure it out piecemeal. So let's dive in, beginning with a story. There were two campers off in the woods asleep one night when a bear came into the campsite, waking one of the campers. And he quickly wakes up his friend and says, hey, there's a bear. We've got to get out of here. So his friend begins to put on his shoes. And the first man says, don't bother putting on your shoes. Even with your sneakers, you can't outrun the bear. To which the second man replies, well, yes, but I don't need to outrun the bear. I just need to outrun you. And in fact, this is true for most of us in our life. If you're trying to win a Nobel Prize or Olympic gold medal, you better be able to outrun the bear. But for most of us, the skills are about outrunning the other campers. And as we discuss the skills today and other skills in your career, keep this in mind. Your goal isn't to be absolutely perfect. Your goal is simply to outrun the other campers. When you apply for a job or try to get a promotion, what you're really doing is outrunning the other candidates for that. When your company bids for a project, they're simply outrunning the other offers. And this is why we see so many companies, I've been in them, I'm sure you have as well, where you say, I can't believe this company's functional. They seem to screw everything up. How do they even operate? How do they survive? And the answer is because they're still better than everyone else out there. So as we look at these skills, don't worry about, I have to be perfect in them. Think about, I just have to be good enough that I am better than the other people I'm competing against. So let's take a look at a picture. Behind this black screen, I've got an image, and I'm going to show you the image. And normally, if this were in person, I'd ask you to shout out what the image is as soon as you see it. For now, just do that in your heads. So I'm going to show you the image, and in your head, say what the image is. Here we go. That's a very clear picture, but I'm guessing some of you aren't quite sure what it is. So maybe let's take another peek. Here we go. Maybe that helped. But I'm guessing a few of you are still uncertain. How about this? No? All right, one more clue. Here we go. Was it obvious? I'm guessing not. So let me make it a little easier for you. This is what we were looking at. Okay, now, obviously it would be difficult to figure out what that was from just seeing one or two small pieces. But if you saw enough of them, you'd start to get a better idea. This is inspired by an ancient Indian parable called The Blind Man and the Elephant. In the parable, there was a king who took a few blind men and said, there's a creature in the forest. I need you to go out, find it, and then to come back and describe it to me. And so the first man went out and he said, it felt like a really big, heavy wall because he touched the side of the elephant. Another man came back and said, what's a spear? Because he had touched the tusk. A third said, it's like a hairy snake because he had grabbed the tail. And the men began to argue with each other until in some versions of the parable, someone brings them all together and explains, you've all touched a different part of the same creature. And eventually they come to the realization that they all just had one small piece of it. This is an important skill and one many of us miss. In our companies, we usually only get exposed to one tiny piece of the larger picture. Now, certainly we think, well, at a company of 300,000 people, of course, I couldn't even tell you where all the other offices are. Even a company of 5,000 people, you might be thinking, sure, there's different departments and divisions, and I occasionally see things mentioned in a newsletter, but I can't keep up with all of it. I can tell you I've been in companies as small as 12 people, where they're all sitting in a room, probably smaller than your house, and I've asked them, what exactly do we do? And I have gotten different answers. And the answers are all oriented based on the part of the elephant that they tend to touch. The finance people gave me a different description than the tech people, who gave me a different description than the marketing people, because they're all very focused on their area. And even though the other parts of the elephant are literally a few feet away in this small company, they don't stop to look at very often. So one of the skills as of the utmost important is to begin to look beyond your piece of the elephant. So let's see how we can do that. Begin by learning your industry. So the industry as a whole, you sit in a company, but it's probably part of a larger supply chain. You have people providing you tools and supplies and services, and in exchange, you're selling that, perhaps direct to an end user, or perhaps that's even being used to do something else. Understand all the different parts of the supply chain. You don't have to be the world's greatest expert in this, right? We're not out running the bear, just the other camper. But look at who are your customers? Who are their customers? How do they provide value to their customers? How are your suppliers providing value to your company? And can that value be replaced by other suppliers or things you can do in-house? Can you move up and down the value chain? This is how you start to think strategically about your role and show that you can add more value. Look at your industry as a whole. What are the trends in the industry? How is it changing? Now, there are the obvious cases. So technological changes, of course, impact most of us. There are changes that we're all experiencing right now as we work from home. But consider a company such as McDonald's, and you think, well, McDonald's, they're in the food services industry, so they pay attention to services and restaurants. And that's true, that is what they do. But McDonald's also needs to pay attention to farming and herding. They need to pay attention to marketing. When they began, they advertised on the radio, in newspapers. Today, they're focused on social media, as well as these other channels. Someone had to pay attention and say, social media is becoming important. Someone probably said, do we need to build a McDonald's app? I don't know if they did or didn't, but someone had to sit there and think about whether that's an opportunity. That's not part of their core business, but for a company like McDonald's, that's critical. Now, your company might not be as big and you might not have to worry about as many areas, but don't just focus on this is my vertical, this is it. You have to look beyond at tangential verticals, including those of your suppliers and customers. Likewise, look for regulatory and technological changes. We all remember last year when every day we seemed to get a new notice about GDPR regulations and how some company we had signed up for was protecting our data. And just about every major company, or any company really, more than about 10, 11 people who had any type of user data had to start worrying about this, even if they weren't inherently a tech company. So you need to pay attention to the larger picture, because the boardroom and the executive room are full of people who saw change coming and saw how they could get in front of it and create opportunities. The unemployment line is littered with people who weren't paying attention to opportunities and said, we don't have to worry about it, just focus on what we do, and miss the opportunities and got outrun, or in some cases just put out because they didn't see the change coming. Learn about your company itself. So we've talked about seeing different pieces of the elephant. Also look at the structure. Why is your company organized the way it is? Why do you have a certain ratio of salespeople to marketing people to customer success? Two companies in the exact same business might have significantly different ratios, because one is a very high touch service business, so you have lots of customer service or account managers. Another is the simple turnkey, no bells and whistles, but cheaper product, so they don't have a lot of support. And both are completely valid businesses, no one's better than the other. But if you look and say, boy, we have a lot of people doing this particular function, it tells you something about what's important to the company. Now, within your department, you know why you have these people and those people, and not more or less. But as you start to look at some of these other departments and other parts of the elephant, start to ask questions like this. Why is it done this way and not differently? Had it been done differently in the past? Perhaps a new manager came in, or maybe there was a reorg, and that's going to tell you something about what the company cares about, where it's putting its resources, and what direction it might go in. Understand how your company makes money. Now, yes, we all know you sell the customer, they enter a credit card, and you get money. But really ask yourself, what is the value that you are providing? How much of that value comes from what your company does versus the raw inputs or post-sales value? There are companies that sell products, but most of their money comes from the professional services. That's different than if most of it comes from the product and professional services just help sell the product, but maybe they make some profit there. Understanding this helps you understand your company better. Look at your competitors. Understand how you are different, because as you continue to evolve your company and they evolve theirs, you might all have the same opportunities in front of you. There might be the same set of potential customers, but some will be easier for you to target and some will be easier for them to target based on those inherent differences. So understanding this gives you an important strategic advantage. And we've talked about this very generally. This applies whether you're an accountant, a salesperson, an engineer, no matter what your role. Having this larger picture is going to help you think about your role more strategically, because it's going to align to what your company needs and what your company does. Now, within your specific department, also work to understand your value. What value does your team provide? This seems, again, trivial. We say, well, we keep the numbers because we're in accounting, or we build the software product because we're engineers. But understand really what is the value add that your team does. What happens if your team goes away? Does the product just become less interesting, or is the product critical? Let me give you an example. If you think about software engineers working at hedge funds, they can fulfill two very different functions at different hedge funds. At a hedge fund that's focused on fundamentals, where they do an analysis of the industry, of the company, they need software developers to keep the systems running, to maybe pull in some data, and to help execute trades. But it's the traders who are creating most of the value. And the software engineers there are providing support, just like the accountant provides support, the janitorial staff provides support, Even the receptionist is providing support so people can come in so they can have meetings. And there's nothing wrong with being support, but the primary value is created by the traders, not by the software engineers. If we compare that with a quant hedge fund, where they hire a bunch of software engineers and say, here's a bunch of sources of data, go figure out how to pull down that source, and now run some technical analysis, figure out some models, find arbitrage opportunities, code it up, and execute that. Now these software developers are the ones who are, through their software, creating the trades that are making money for the company. The software developers are now the primary driver of revenue. Two different companies, but the nature of the role provides differing amounts of value. Now, obviously, at neither company could you get rid of all the software engineers and still function. Just like if you got rid of the janitorial staff, you'd say, well, we don't need them, they're not doing the trades, but eventually the trash builds up and we're not able to function. But the amount of direct value provided differs in those two companies. So ask yourself, how much direct value does your team provide? And then what do you provide as a member of the team? You personally, your skills, what you're bringing to the team. Consider as well, as you want to get a promotion to another job, are you going to provide the same type of value? Classically, an individual contributor or a manager provide different value, but you get the managerial role because you did well as an individual contributor. So understand whether that's going to be the same value deliverance. Now, speaking of managers, we've all heard the term learn to manage your manager. It's almost a platitude. We've heard it, we get what it means, but most people have never actually sat down to think, what concretely do I need to do to learn to manage my manager? Begin by asking what your manager wants. That's usually straightforward. They want the project to go well, they want a promotion, they want to fill a couple slots. That's the easy one, along with your manager's goals. But start to think about your manager's style. Now, style could be anything from your manager doesn't like to receive a call after 7 p.m. or prefers that you bring up an issue in person rather than emailing her. But it could also be how you approach problem solving. Some managers say, I want you to come to me after you've fully thought out solutions, bring me a couple options, and then we'll discuss. Others like to be involved from the start when you're just thinking through the idea so they feel they've contributed more input, or because they know it's a complex issue and they have experience, they want to provide direction for you. Knowing whether you should bring that to your manager at the start or the end of your process is important. In one case, you're aligning to how your manager likes to work. In the other, your manager feels slightly frustrated. Now, in some cases, we have bad managers who blow up at you. In other cases, they might not explicitly say anything, but it's still not how they like to work. And now you're not engaging as efficiently as you could be. Likewise, your manager has strengths and weaknesses. Thinking about what those are allows you to recognize how you can fill in for some of those weaknesses and make your manager more effective. Generally speaking, a good manager will recognize people on her team who have helped her achieve her goals. And if she's smart, when she moves on to another role, she's going to say, I need this person with me to help me continuing to achieve, and will reward you as well. It's not uncommon for managers to move and bring teams with them at larger corporations. These techniques, of course, work not just with your manager, but also your coworkers. So now the philosophy that I hold is, what can I do to make you more successful? This is also something quite literal. When I join a new organization as an executive or as a consultant, and I meet with the other executives or other departments, I will literally say, after chatting with them, what can I do to make you more successful? This explicitly enumerates what their needs are. They might have said a few things, but now I'm very directly asking, what do you need? But I'm doing so in a way saying, I want to support you and help you. It helps to build that relationship. Now, after you've gone through this exercise and have figured out all these great things about your manager and your coworkers, consider doing it for yourself as well. You have these ideas, but have you ever sat and formally said, here's what I want, here's my style, here are my strengths and weaknesses. When I join a company, I also have a very clear discussion with my team or with anyone I hire, and I run through this. And I say, this is my managerial style. Here's how I want you to approach me. Here's how I like to engage with you. Here's a process we like to use. I'm not talking about whatever process the department has, but just how you and I will relate and communicate to each other. Whether I prefer emails or instant message or how to do this, I list that out. So now we have a clearer way to work. So spend a little time and think about it for yourself. And as you join teams and work with others, don't be afraid to be explicit about this. It'll just make you more effective. You've probably heard the expression, you need to be proactive at work. And again, it's one of these things we all know, we hear it, we try to think about what can I do, but I want to put it in much more concrete terms. Frank Gilbreth Sr. famously said, I choose a lazy person to do a hard job because a lazy person will find an easy way to do it. Now, he was an efficiency expert who used to stand at assembly lines and watch people work to understand what they could do to be more or less efficient. If you've ever read the book Cheaper by the Dozen, it was written by one of his daughters who roughly based it in a fictionalized way on his life. Learning how every single action on an assembly line, how they had to move their arm, it's probably not as easy for you to see this on a webcam, how far they had to move if they had to take a step to really minimize that. Because of course on an assembly line, if you can shave off even half a second, that adds up. Now, I've taken that philosophy. For me, I try to be a lazy manager. I try to do as little as possible. But what do I mean by that? Every time I am needed to make a decision, every time my team has to say, we need your input, we need your help, we're not sure what to do, I'll certainly do it. I'm not trying to shirk my responsibility, but it means I had to be there for that, and I could not be doing something else. If there's any way I could empower them to do a little more, to take one step closer to a solution, that means it's one less thing I had to do, and then I can focus my time doing something else, adding more value, because as we learned in previous slides, understanding what my value is and what additional value I can add. So I try to do as little as possible. I look for what's happening and I say, you know, spending a lot of time doing this, how can I empower my team? How can I train my team? How can I create a process to help make this decision factor easier? Whatever it is, and it will be obviously different depending on your department and your company, think about ways you can be lazy. Think about ways you can minimize your work and take one less step, because that's going to allow you to save time to do more for the company. So be lazy in terms of the minimum you have to do, and then use that extra time to do more. Now, within a company, there is lots of messaging that gets sent out. Forgive my borrowed quote from Shakespeare. And this is something many people struggle with. We've all heard expressions such as, this manager has decided to step down to spend more time with his family. Of course, many of you who I'm sure not new to the workforce are familiar with the fact that this is just a euphemism for someone screwed up and we had to get rid of him. But for various reasons, we don't want to say this. For an individual getting fired, it might not matter, but there's more to it when we see other announcements. So for example, a company might say, we're excited to announce our partnership with this other company here. And maybe indeed they are, and maybe it's a wonderful partnership that's going to provide value to both companies. Or maybe in fact, what it really means is we were about to lose millions of dollars and I was about to get fired by the board, but I found a company that can do it for us. And so I signed this contract and they're going to get 99% of the profits, but hey, at least I didn't screw up. But of course, I can't say this in the press release. So I'm going to talk about the wonderful opportunities and not really mention all these bad details. Right? Now, it's a bit of a contrived example, but we see this all the time. There's what's being said and then what's between the lines. And it's important to understand what's happening between the lines. At one of my early companies, I had noticed a bunch of the senior team was having a lot of meetings, not their regular weekly management meeting, but a bunch of other meetings. Occasionally, there were one or two other people I didn't recognize in those meetings, but they were in suits. I was at a tech company, so suits kind of stood out. I thought, something's going on. And they tend to look a little stressed when they'd come out of the meeting. But yeah, I didn't really pay attention because I had my job as a software engineer and they'll let me know if it's important. This went on for a few months, and then one day my manager called me into his office and said, well, this may come as a surprise for you, or maybe not, but I'm leaving the company. I'm going to go start my own, and these people are coming with me. Now, I got lucky in this situation because he invited me to go with him, and my current company said, no, we want you to stay, and I had opportunity. But you're not always going to be so lucky. There was very clear information being provided. Something was going on. The signs were totally obvious. They were right in front of me, and I wasn't paying attention to them. It might not have been, in this case, it was a fallout between the founders. That could have also been a sign that the company was in financial trouble. Could have been a sign that the company was going to be acquired. And of course, even if it was going to be acquired, which sounds like a great outcome, if you're in a department that's redundant, it's not going to be so great for you. There's lots of information and you need to gain access to it. Now, I'm not saying you have to spend half your time in corporate intrigue trying to go through the whisper mill and figure out what's going on, but you do need to pay attention. You do need to be aware. What's happening? Who are the people meeting? Who are they meeting with? Is it the same people or different people? Why are they shifting people to a project or away from a project? Why are they starting to put more resources in a particular place? Why is someone traveling to this city a lot all of a sudden? These are some of the questions that might begin to give you insights that's going to let you know what's happening in the company. Again, by being aware, you can be in front of change, whether that's getting involved with the right projects or recognizing the opportunity and delivering more value, or it's going to help you avoid a negative consequence if you're going to be on the wrong side of change, whether that means your project's actually getting canceled or your department's going to get laid off and it's time to start looking for a job. So begin to pay attention, not just to what's literally being said, but what's really happening between the lines. Now, I've listed here a great book called The Ropes to Skip and the Ropes to Know. If this is not something that comes naturally to you, this is a very good book to read to help you with that. It's written as a parable, so it's a fictionalized book. It's a very easy read. You can read it pretty much in an afternoon, but it will begin to show you how to think about how this is happening and understanding the mechanics of how this type of information flow actually works. We're also going to, in the next few slides, look at other ways that you can begin to build up your information channels. So office politics is similar, although different from what we just described. And office politics is a topic many people hate. I myself just ran from it early in my career. But it's important to recognize you can't hide from office politics. It's like gravity. You can say it doesn't exist, but when you walk over the edge of a cliff, you're going to fall whether or not you believe in it. The important thing when focused on office politics is to recognize it is a tool. And like any tool, it can be used for good or bad. We generally associate office politics with negativity, with the person who's a sycophant or the backstabber. And certainly those types of people tend to use office politics, but that doesn't mean it can only be used in that way. And so I'm going to give you a very basic model for thinking about office politics that comes from the book Survival of the Savvy and the research of Brendan and Sedman. Think about a political spectrum that goes from less political to more political. That's it, one-dimensional spectrum. Some of you will recognize you're strongly on one side or the other, or perhaps in the middle. So what are the characteristics on the spectrum? On the one side, we have people on the less political side who tend to focus more on a meritocracy. The best idea should win. Let's just put all the ideas together and we'll line them up and we'll evaluate them and then we pick the best one. We're going to follow the rules. We're going to follow the process. That's why we have rules. They're here for a reason, and doing so helps us get the outcomes that the company wants. They also tend to believe in self-evidence. If you do a good job, that should be visible to everyone and it should speak for itself. And so they tend to just keep their heads down, do a good job and say, look at my work, and then hope things turn out for the best. On the other side, people tend to be more political. You have people who are relationship oriented. it has a lot to do with their personal relationships. I don't mean anything inappropriate, but just the relationship you have with your coworkers. Who do you trust? Who do you work well with? Whose advice do you take? They focus on getting to the end, right? Getting the right result. Yeah, maybe we didn't follow the process completely, but we were under time constraints. We had these things, and really it's about doing X. It's about delivering value to the customer. It's about completing the project on time. It's about whatever the goal was. And you might have had to bend a few rules, but you're doing it for the right reason. They also tend to believe in more self-promotion. And I don't necessarily mean in a bad way, but in, oh, I did this project. I want to make sure everyone knows about it. And, oh, have you heard about our project? Our project did this. Oh, yeah, maybe there's a way you can use our project. Right? And they spend time communicating that. Now, in both these cases, we can imagine people going to an extreme, too far out on the side. People who focus only on relationships and don't care about the ideas at all. People who are about getting results, even if they do wrong things to get there, or who are just about self-promotion and add no real value. Those are overly political people. Likewise, there are people, and we've probably met them, both on the over-political and under-political side, who do a great job, but just no one knows about it. They don't know how to express it. They don't know how to communicate the ideas well. They can't sell those ideas, and these great ideas never go anywhere. Again, you can find yourself anywhere along the spectrum, and you're probably fine and happy with where you are. But it's important to recognize that not everyone is in the same place along the spectrum, and you're going to interact with people who come from different parts of the spectrum. So one way that I've actually made mistakes in the past in politics is I was very much on the less political side. I'm an engineer by training. I'm all about do a good job and meritocracy, and the results speak for themselves. And so I would do a good job and think, here it is, isn't it obvious? But someone higher up in the chain, it's not that they don't want the best option possible, but they're busy. They don't have a lot of time to engage and evaluate all this, and especially because it involves details that I'm an expert in, other people on the team are an expert in, but they're not. And so they need to make faster judgments. And one way they do this is based on relationships. Because they say, oh, well, Tim's been my right-hand man. I've known Tim for years. If Tim says option B is the way to go, I trust Tim's judgment. He's had more time to look at than I do. That's a relationship-based decision. That's not necessarily wrong, but it's different than how I would make a decision. And I have to recognize if that's who I'm selling to, I need to adjust, and I might need to do a little more self-promotion. And by self-promotion, I don't mean of myself, but of the project, and not just think, well, this will speak for itself. I have to recognize how to communicate and engage with them. So spend some time to think about where you are on the political spectrum and where other people are, but don't look at other people who are different than you as either incompetent, if they're on the less political side, they don't know how to build relationships or do any of this, or as Machiavellian, and they're spending all this time investing in relationships and trying to get ahead. It's the nature of how they approach problems that are leading them to do this. It's not better or worse, it's different. And you need to be able to adapt and engage with people all along the spectrum. Now, if this sounds complex or difficult or scary, it's worth spending some time developing these skills. So the book I mentioned here, Survival of the Savvy, is probably the best book I've read on office politics. It lays out this model in a much more complex way and gives you tools for how you can do that. And we'll also talk about one or two of those tools in the upcoming slides. Make sure that you build your office network while you're at your company. Now, we've all heard networking is important. We need to build a wide and diverse network, and that's true, but it's equally true within your company. So first, let's talk about how, and then we'll talk about the benefits. So get to know people throughout your organization. Normally, I'd say do that through coffee and lunch. If you've got a cafeteria or a break room, spend time engaging with people there. Ask people out for coffee. Now, that's a little harder these days as many of us are stuck at home, but you can still do a virtual equivalent. There are tools out there that can do random pairings of people, or you can ask your HR department to just set up a program where they'll just randomly mix up people from different departments. At one of my companies, actually a few, we implemented lunch and learns. And so this would get people in from different departments, and we talk about topics, some relevant to the company, some just for fun, but got us all together and interacting and engaging. And lunch and learn, of course, takes little or no effort. It's also something you can easily do while virtual. We even did some games. For example, we used to do a trivia contest about every month or two. We were in a travel company, so we did travel trivia, but we would pair people up, making sure the people in the pairs came from different departments, so they started interacting with each other more. You can find ways to create groups and pairings of people across departments. There's also mentoring. You can mentor other people, they can mentor you, even helping out peers, training people, getting them up to speed, or just getting involved with different projects and teams in different departments or a cross-functional team. These are different ways you can engage with people. I think more than ever, while we're stuck at home, while we're not going to bump into people in the water cooler, you need to be more proactive. And I would encourage you to talk to your HR, if they don't already do this, to create some type of every other week, a kind of random pairing of, hey, have a virtual coffee with someone for 30, 45 minutes to engage and learn about people. So now what's the benefit of doing this? First, this is going to expose you to more information. We talked about reading between the lines. Remember that you see only so much. You only see your piece of the elephant. You're going to begin to see other pieces of the elephant. Now that might be literally just how do things work in your department. It could also be just as I saw a bunch of executives meeting and something was going on but I didn't know what, someone who might have been in a different office would not have been exposed to that. You might have a boss telling you, this is a really important project, you want to be on it, but if your friend in finance says, yeah, I know they asked for $10 million, but they're only getting $1, that's going to tell you it might not be as important as your boss thinks. So it can provide you with differing amounts of information. And of course, this comes only after you've built that relationship, which takes time. It provides a defensive network when you're dealing with political problems. I glossed over this a little on the first one. We can spend hours talking about politics and the model, but certainly there are some times where you face political attacks. If you have more people who know you personally, know the quality of your work, they're going to rise to your defense. Now, it's whether it's you being attacked personally or whether your proposal is going up against someone else's. The more people you have who say, hey, Sarah has done a lot of research on this. She's really thought through it. I've heard her plan. It sounds really good. Then those relationships will help someone making more of a relationship-based decision. So the stronger your network, the more it's going to help you in dealing with any political channels. It's going to help give you feedback on your image, and we're going to talk about that in a slide or two. And finally, it's just useful for support on projects. Different people with their different parts of the elephant can give you new insights into your project and how it can work and opportunities and risks. So be sure to make some effort to develop your network, not just outside your company, certainly do that, but also look within your company and focus on building some of those relationships. This won't happen overnight. It's going to take time. Begin to invest in it. If you're not really sure how to begin networking, Never Eat Alone by Keith Ferrazzi is one of the best books on networking. It's part advice, part storytelling. Keith is a master networker, and it's a pretty easy read and will help you start to think about how to apply a networking philosophy to the people you meet. All right, I mentioned public image. So it's important to build up your public image within the company. We've all heard this, we need to build up our image, but it's not just outside the company within the professional realm overall, it's also inside. You can do this a number of different ways. First is your overall communication. It's in many ways every email you send out, every interaction you have. Imagine if every time you send an email, there's a typo, an obvious typo. People start to think, this person, he might be smart, but he's a little sloppy, right? That's saying something about you. Now, I'm not saying triple check every email you send. We all make typos. We're used to it, but it is sending out a message about you. When you get involved in a project, when you get involved in a leadership role, whether or not you have a title, whether you help lead, you are building that image about you. When you present to the company, whether it's a formal presentation or whether you're just doing a lunch and learn, you are you're helping to build up that image. Your public speaking skills matter. And public speaking, many people think of it as this. Whether virtual or in the real world, you stand in front of a podium to a large audience and you spew out information. And this is, of course, a very formal means of public speaking. But when you're sitting around the table with your teammates and you're saying, hey, everyone, I have an idea. What if we do this? That is a form of public speaking. That's how you're going to convey your ideas. It might last a matter of 60 seconds. It might not be rehearsed. It might be more extemporaneous, but it's still a form of public speaking. And investing in public speaking is going to help you project your image and be stronger. Publications and talks, whether internal in the company newsletter or doing talks in the company or doing it externally. If you're the one going out to conferences, that makes you look more impressive to your peers. I've been teaching at MIT for 20 years, and even though no one at my companies has ever taken any of my classes, they think, oh, that's the guy who's been teaching at MIT. That gives me credibility, that builds my image in the company. And when I join companies, I get introduced as, oh, Mark's also been teaching for 20 years at MIT. They think, oh, okay, I should start listening to this guy. He can't be a total putz because MIT won't let him keep coming back. So it helps to build up your reputation. Obviously, joining trade groups and just general leadership opportunities. All of this is going to build up your public image, both within the company and outside of it. This is going to be useful for building that relationship with other people. It's going to be useful when someone makes more of a relationship-based decision and they think, well, this person's credible because of their image. It's going to help you in all sorts of ways. So invest some time building a public image. And if you're not sure how, a fantastic book by my friend Dory Clark called Reinventing You walks you through how to think about building up your personal brand. There's many other books on this topic as well. One small note, especially as we're all being super casual at home, do remember appearance counts. Now, that doesn't mean you have to always dress up. Working in tech, there are times I very explicitly dress down, because if I show up to an event and I'm wearing a suit and tie, the other developers are going to look at me and say, ah, he's some suit, and not, oh, you're a guy who actually understands technology. So dress for what you are trying to convey. Think about your image, think about what you want to say, dress appropriately, but also every day how you communicate, how you engage will build up your image and reputation. So what can you take away from this talk? First, try to see the whole elephant. That's both within your company and in the industry. Look at the different parts. Every day you focus on a very specific part. Even if you're an executive, you're still focused within that particular functional vertical. So try to take some time and make some effort to see the other parts of the elephant. Learn how to manage your manager and ideally your other coworkers as well. And if you've got the time, learn to master yourself and understand how you operate, because understanding how you operate, how they operate, makes it smoother, makes it easier for you to engage with other people and them to engage with you. Be proactive, or if that's too general, do what I do and try to be lazy. Think about how to minimize your work so you can invest your newfound free time in delivering more value to the company. Understand how to navigate your company, how to read between the lines and figure out how you're going to understand what's really going on, what they tell you, and then what might actually not be told to you. Recognize that office politics exist. Any company that tells you we don't have politics here, at the very least, they're naive. At worst, they might just be denying its existence. Politics, when you're a company of more than about 4 people, it exists. It's not necessarily bad. Understand it is a tool and how to use that tool. Be sure to build your network within the company as well as outside of it, but that's a whole other talk. But build up those relationships because it's going to help you with these different pieces that we've been talking about. And finally, pay attention to your public image and take steps to proactively craft how you want to be perceived in your company, because that's going to help you engage on these other pieces. Now, what I recommend doing, I threw a lot of different topics at you. You're not going to be able to jump and do it all. It's kind of like January 1st. You don't say, I'm going to stop smoking and lose weight and wake up early and eat better, and you're going to give it all up by lunchtime. Instead, you focus on 1, maybe 2 things. So write this down, put it away in a file somewhere. What I'd recommend is putting a recurring event on your calendar, say every month or every quarter. Go back to that file and say, oh, right, I remember there's this talk and now I'm supposed to go look back. Okay, I've been good at being more proactive. Maybe now I'm going to work on managing my manager. So take a few notes, put it away, and just put down a calendar event to remind you to come back to these different activities as you develop your career. And finally, for your reference, so here are the different books we mentioned. Reinventing You will help you with your public image. Never Eat Alone is a great book on networking. Survival of the Savvy, hands down, best book I've read on office politics. The Ropes to Skip and Ropes to Know, a good fictionalized account of how to think about understanding corporate communication and what they're really saying. And then finally, I'll mention my book, The Career Toolkit, Essential Skills for Success That No One Taught You. This content is based on one of the chapters on working effectively. There's also chapters on creating a career plan, leadership, negotiation, networking, communication, and all these other skills we all know are important. Everyone's been telling us to do them for years, but no one actually sat and taught them to us in college or other graduate programs or even our mentors. So this book will lay out a lot of the skills we talked about in this talk and many others that will be useful for your career. The book comes out in September. If you don't want to wait that long, if you go to the website, you can also download the free app that has a lot of the information in bite-sized form. So with that, I'm going to stop the prepared talk and turn it over to questions.
Thank you so much, Mark, for all of that information. I just want to remind everyone that you can use the questions box to submit questions, even while we are answering others. So I'll kick off with a couple of questions that have already come in. Someone asked, how do you balance managing office politics when you work in a toxic environment?
Good question. I will first say the older I've gotten, the less my tolerance for toxicity. It's just never been useful. Now, I've been lucky that in my career, I've been at a point for many years that I could just walk away from a job. I'm not saying everyone can. You can't always change jobs. Maybe because of your industry and location, you're restricted and there's not many other options. But if you're spending a lot of time in a toxic culture, then that means you're spending a percentage of your time, 1%, 10%, 30%, dealing with things that are not delivering value to your customers, to your shareholders. You're spinning your wheels. That's not good for your career. It's not good for your customers. And just mentally, I find it draining. My advice, the older I get, is if you're in a toxic culture, it's time to move. Again, that sounds a little easy. Let's assume you can't move. Begin to build up, and this is general because I don't know what makes it toxic. There's different versions. It could be sexual harassment. It could be an office bully. It could be a micromanager. But what you should try to do is build those relationships with people on your team or at other teams. As you begin to build this relationship, first you're going to see other parts of the company. Maybe they're not quite as toxic, but also you're going to work on your own public image as more people get to know you. And you're going to develop your reputation and build up connections to help you be more successful. How much time you should put into that? There's no magic number like 22.5%. You're going to just have to find the balance. But over time, as you begin to have positive relationships with more people, that's going to hopefully help you and make dealing with some of the toxicity easier.
Thank you. Someone has asked, what is the best way to begin a mentor relationship, to ask someone to be your mentor or your sponsor?
Great question. There's a lot of different ways to do this, and it depends on dynamic. There are people I consider mentors where we never formally talked about. It's just someone I've worked with who I happen to learn a lot from. And it's just been a fantastic relationship. If you'd like it to be more formal, you can approach the person and say, I would like you to be my mentor, or I'd like to come to you for guidance and help. Now, don't just do that out of the blue. It should be someone, hopefully, who you know, but if not, try to find a mutual connection who can introduce you, and reach out to this person. Now, the good news is it's not that hard to ask, because the ask is actually, when done right, is a very polite thing to do. When you ask someone to be your mentor, what you're saying is, I think you are great. I respect you. I admire you. I think your advice is good. You're basically flattering the person. You don't have to use those exact words, but when you say, I'd love it if you could mentor me, you're saying you are great. And people like to hear that about themselves. So when you reach out, you're doing so in a way that's very complimentary to them. So I would approach this person and say, if assuming they don't know you well, hopefully they know you a little, or you got the introduction, you give a little background on yourself, and you talk about what you're hoping to do, and ask them if they could spend some time mentoring you. You want to give the background on yourself and what you want, because you want to make sure this is going to align. If they hear that and say, I really don't know that space, or I can't really help you, or I struggle with that, you're going to know that from the start. If you're doing more of a formal mentoring, then you also want to talk about, whether formally or not, kind of expectations. Are you going to have some regular cadence, maybe a monthly call or meet for coffee every few weeks? Or is it going to be more reach out from time to time when you need help? So this should be kind of understood from the start, the nature of that relationship. When you ask someone to be your mentor, also consider what is the value you are giving them. It's very easy to say, you're wise, you're smart, please give me information, give me help. That's great for me, but why should this person do that? Now, many people are happy just to go out and give advice and just do it for the enjoyment. I do these talks, I've been teaching for years, because I really do enjoy helping people. But still, it'd be nice if you can give something back to them. Understand their needs. And so in a classic case, we have an older, more experienced mentor with a younger person. Often what that younger person provides is just kind of a insight and freshness. If you think about the classic, maybe 60-year-old professor, that professor barely knows how to use an iPhone. Yes, I'm stereotyping. They don't know what the hot apps are and what the kids are doing. And if you're the college student going to this professor, you can help them feel more connected to the newer world, to the changes. I'm not saying you formally say, oh, you've now told me this, let me give you an update on the app of the week, but it's going to come up in the conversation. So think about what value you deliver. Consider as well, within a corporation, we talked about different pieces of the elephant. When you're sitting way up here in the executive room or at some high managerial level, and you have hundreds of people below you, you don't know every detail of what's going on. Or if it's not so in your department, you are only getting a summary view of the other department, maybe from the other manager that's been well filtered. So you're going to have insights into other things that this person does not. That might be another way you can provide feedback back to the mentor. I'll mention one other thing as you think about selecting a mentor. We normally think of the mentor should be, this is who I want to be in 10 years, 20 years. I want someone kind of just like who I'll be. And that's fine. That's a great mentor to have. But there's many other types of mentors you can have. Certainly someone should be within your industry because they understand it well. But you might find someone who's not within your industry, but has other skills you admire, maybe about leadership, maybe about developing a network. They're in a totally different industry, but you can still learn from them. You're going to learn those skills. They're just not going to give you a lot of advice on your industry. So don't be afraid to diversify and get different people. What matters is that you have people whose skills you respect and admire and who you can have a relationship with, and then build up that diverse skill set. Typically, you're not going to have more than maybe 2 mentors at a time. If you start having much more, it's going to be hard to juggle them. And so spend some time with your mentor, develop that relationship, and eventually it's going to come to an end, either because someone transfers out of the company or you've kind of gotten all you want, or it just tapers off, and that's fine, and that's time to bring in your next mentor.
Thank you. That was really great advice. A couple of people have asked, how can they apply these skills to changing their job or their career, whether that's pivoting from academia to corporate or from short-term consulting to a permanent role? How can these skills help them?
Sure. I'm going to throw in one slight plug. In chapter 1 of my book, Career Planning, I talk about a formal framework for how you can think about advancing your career or making changes. In this particular case, you can do so with these skills in a number of ways. So first, building your network. Now, we all know networks are very helpful for any type of job change. And I've mentioned you should obviously have a network outside the company. Even within the company, these people might know people elsewhere, and they can lead to introductions and connections that can lead you to new opportunities. Building your personal brand, it's not as though you have one brand inside the company and one outside. They might not totally align, but they're not going to be totally different. Ideally, they should be moving in the same direction or completely aligned. And so as you build up your brand within the company, that's going to permeate your brand outside. Now, this can come from, I want to do a talk and you're at some conference or an event or doing something for IB exec and more people get to know you. It could even be, even if you're doing something about the company. So let's suppose this whole talk was me talking about the great things my company is doing and why you should use our products. You're still going to get an impression of me. You're going to say, that Mark is really well spoken, or that Mark was totally incoherent. And that's going to affect my reputation even beyond the product or the main content of the talk. So building your brand is going to help your reputation. That's going to open or potentially close doors. As you use a book like The Ropes to Skip and Ropes to Know and think about how the company is evolving, or more generally, that corporate elephant, you're going to see opportunities and risks. We mentioned this briefly earlier. Your company is evolving. Even if your company says, we're making the same product that we made the last 40 years, the environment in which that product exists will be evolving, right? The nature of how people buy. Just think about, were any of us buying on the internet 30 years ago? How they buy, how it gets delivered, how they use it, how they engage with it. And so there's constantly evolving opportunities. You can, by recognizing these opportunities, start to get in front of it. So one way that I was able to advance my career early on, I was fortunate to be a startup. And the great thing about startups is there's no walls, both literally and figuratively. So when I wanted to advance to the next rung in my career, I thought about what are the skills I need? And then I found ways where I could get involved in projects that would grant me those skills. So I was working as a software developer. My job was just to write code. But if there's a team forming over here, if the marketing team is trying to do something, I can literally walk 5 feet over, talk to the marketing and say, oh, do you guys need help? Because it's a startup, everyone's short-staffed and behind. And I started to engage on these projects. 6 months later, I can now say, I did X. I've now built up this skill, or I know this tool, or I've done something. And so when I go for whether it's my promotion or my next job, I can say, yes, I was a software engineer. I did software engineering things, but I also did X. And let me tell you about that. And you can begin to build up these other skills. And you can do so by recognizing what are the, you don't have to recognize what's coming. You can just say, hey, these people need help. But if you're paying attention to what's happening in these changes and the needs and the value, you can focus your effort to pick the X's that provide the most value for your next role.
Thank you. I just want to let everyone know that we have time for a couple of more questions. So if you have them, now's the time to submit them. Someone asked, what is your advice when you're networking internally? How to understand who in the environment is a supporter and who is a detractor?
Good question. I would suggest it really matters about building up relationships. You're not going to know ahead of time. You won't know. I was actually having dinner with a friend last night. We were talking about one of her friends, and she said, oh, she told me she doesn't like this guy, but then I see him, at some social event we're at, and she says what a great friend he is, right? This person's obviously being two-faced. There's a social example, but the same thing applies, right? In the meeting, oh yeah, that's a really good idea. And then behind the scenes, the boss, terrible project. How do you know? Well, most people won't come out and tell you. You're going to find out by having that wider network, by trying to meet more people, by building those relationships. A few things will happen. First, some of those detractors might actually now become a supporter. It might be just that they didn't know you. I have seen time and again in social settings as well as corporate settings, people who just kind of got off on the wrong foot and they say, oh yeah, that person doesn't like me. And the other person says, yeah, that person doesn't like me. And once they start to engage, they realize a lot of it was just first impression or in their heads, and they built up a better relationship. It could be building those relationships reduce the amount of detraction or turn them completely into a supporter. Even if it doesn't, by having a wider network, you're going to get more insights because now there was a meeting that you weren't in or some water cooler conversation, and so on your network can say, hey, I know Bob's been talking about how your project sounds great, but he was just telling Carol he's really not a fan of it. You're not going to know that unless the other person at the water cooler is in your network. So a larger network gains you more access. So I wouldn't focus on who is who. I would just start building relationships. And of course, over time, you'll just start to get a sense of who really is supportive and who might be not as much.
That's great advice. I think we have time for one last question. That someone asked, is there a way to leverage these skills in an interview and use them to present yourself in a better light?
I would say so. We talked about a number of skills, so I'm going to just pick some off the top of my head. Certainly, from a brand perspective, your brand precedes you in the interview. So if you've built up these skills, it will hopefully bring your reputation in as you walk into the room. Even if not, if you've done things and said, I need to build up my image, so I'm going to make sure I do a lot of talks internally or externally, or maybe I'm even going to take a public speaking class so I can get better at this. Well, now that's going to be reflected on your resume because you're going to list, oh, I spoke at this conference, or I did 4 different company-wide presentations at my last company, or under training, you list your degrees, and also I've also had training in media relations or in public speaking or other skills. That's a very literal sense. We just talked about how to turn detractors into supporters. That's a not uncommon question. How do you deal with difficult coworkers? It's a common interview question. And so you can mention, you know, I was at this company and I knew there was this person in our department really didn't get along. And I made an effort to build up my network. I first met other people in that department and other people who knew him. And I was just building up my network in general. And then over time, we started interacting more. And as he got to know me a little better, I asked him out to lunch and coffee, and we started to build our relationship. And now we're actually on very good terms. So I was able to take someone who wasn't a fan and convert them into a friend. You always in interviews want to show, not tell, right? Give a concrete example, not just say, well, I'm good at making people like me. Give that example. And by engaging in some of these activities, you can talk about how. Or for example, you can say, I was focused in this particular department. I was an accountant and used to just do credit financing, but I started spending more time with my friends in product and marketing and other groups just to start learning more about the product. And then I recognized there was an opportunity for a market segment who couldn't afford it under current financing terms, but I thought about a way we could provide through a partnership a different type of credit, and that expanded our marketplace, all because I was able to engage with other people. And now you just told a success story in your interview.
Wonderful. Well, Mark, thank you so much. This has been a very informative and interesting discussion. So everyone, please remember you'll receive a recording of this webinar by email in the next few days. And I want to thank you again, Mark, for your time and your expertise. And we hope that everyone has a good day.
Thank you, everyone, for giving me your time.